There are calls for home education to be reviewed following a BBC investigation into the death of a boy from scurvy. The 8-year-old who lived in Pembrokeshire had been taught at home. An unpublished draft report shows concerns were raised with authorities, but they were not acted upon. Here's our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt with more details about the case.
He was invisible to the authorities, according to the draft of the Serious Case Review leaked to BBC Wales. It says they knew so little about Dylan, it was impossible to even draw a pen picture of him. He was educated at home, and the inquest into his death heard although he was registered with a GP, no record was found of him seeing a doctor or dentist from 13 months old until he died of scurvy, aged 8. Dylan's parents were charged with neglect after his death in 2011. The Crown Prosecution Service dropped the charges in November 2014, deciding it wasn't in the public interest to continue. At the inquest into their son's death, his parents disputed that Dylan had scurvy. They also say he wasn't invisible to the outside world. The draft Serious Case Review details a complicated story. It says Dylan's parents were in a lengthy legal dispute with neighbouring Ceredigion Council after his mother, a teacher, injured herself at one of their schools. During the case, a lawyer and head teacher concerned by the mother's mental health alerted the authorities about a child being taught at home. That was a year before Dylan's death. The report says he was not known to Pembrokeshire education officials and they had no power to see him. The report concludes that the laws and the regulations that surround home education in Wales need strengthening as a matter of urgency. It goes as far as to say that existing regulations are inadequate to ensure a child's safety.
Well, we can talk to Barry Sheerman, the Labour MP for Huddersfield and the former chair of the Education Select Committee. He joins us from our studio in Westminster. We're also joined from Shropshire by the author Mike Wood, who educated his 4 children at home and who runs the Home Education UK website. Thank you both for joining us. Barry, first of all, Pembrokeshire education authorities say he was not known to them and they had no power anyway to check up on him. What is the situation?
Well, that is a real problem. There was an attempt to bring in a bill to deal with the home education area just before the end of the last Labour government, and that failed. The Conservatives,
why did it fail?
Well, the Conservatives wouldn't agree to some of the clauses, and the fact is that we get down to the sad death of hearts go out to the friends of this little boy, Dylan. But there have been other cases like this. There's a memorable one not very long ago in Birmingham. There's nothing wrong in principle with home education, but there are people out there using home education for purposes that why worry about. And it is our duty as a government and as a society to make sure every child is well educated, safe and well. And we do have a societal responsibility for that. And while some home education is absolutely right for some children, most children, we need to know where they are and the quality of the education and support they're getting at home.
The Welsh Assembly is looking at introducing some legislation. Has this shone a light on the bigger picture, and is it time perhaps to look again at introducing a bill in the Commons?
I think it is. There was a very thorough report, the Badman report, into this. It got a very hostile reaction from home educators who were the core of them are very energetic and very eloquent in terms of defence of higher education. I don't blame them for that. But the fact is there are a lot of people now using home education. The Prime Minister himself was speaking this week about illegal schools. There's a document circulating up and down the country which gives you the ability, gives you the tips on how to prove you're home educated. And of course, some of this home education is then leads to the setting up of illegal schools, sometimes by religious people, others by having other motivations. But the fact is, these two things to go together, and there's an increasing concern that no one in children's services know where many children are, and nobody in the educational system does.
Mike Fortunewood, how do you see it? You represent effectively homeschooling families.
Yes, I don't represent other homeschooling families, but I do run a website that supports home education in the UK. My feelings of what Barry's just said is that home educators generally do not support the running of illegal schools, and we wouldn't sanction that in the least. And I don't actually know of anybody who actually attends such a school, so I'm not entirely sure who these people are.
What about the premise of legislation to enable education authorities to keep better tabs on kids who are homeschooled? Would you support that?
Well, the truth of the matter is that in all cases that we know of, children who've run into difficulties with their parents and have perhaps died or have been abused or neglected were well known by their local authorities. And even this case in South Wales, it appears that whilst the local authority is saying they had no knowledge of them and no way of acting, it seems to me that they should have looked closer at Section 47 of the Children Act 1989, which gives them exactly that power.
So you dispute a claim then that the education authorities have no power to actually see kids?
Well, all we know from the reports on the television and the newspapers, but apparently a head teacher and a solicitor both reported this case and no action was taken. Now, you wouldn't invoke home education regulations as to how to deal with that. You would invoke the Children's Act.
Let's bring in
the wrong act, it seems to me.
So, Barry Sheerman, is there not a loophole here then, if there is Section 47 of this Act that enables education authorities to see children?
Well, as a Member of Parliament, I spent a lot of time with my Director of Children's Services, and I talked to a lot of directors of children's services up and down the country. They're very concerned about the lack of joined up. Sometimes it's regulation, but sometimes it's the link. And the first time you know that someone's in trouble, a child's in trouble, is usually from the school, a perceptive school teacher or support worker, or a social worker, or a GP. When these tragedies appear and we have a serious case review, normally it is this lack of joined upness. The trouble is, it's very, very difficult to have a joined up system when children do register as home educated. That is the real problem. It is very difficult to make sure, as I'm coming back to the principles, that we in a civilised society have got to ensure that every child is well educated, safe and secure. So there is a very real need, I think, to take into account good home education, support it, but make sure that what's happening at home in educational terms is of good quality.
Mike Fortunewood, Barry Sheerman. Yes, quick response, Mike Fortunewood, and then we're out of time.
The reason that there's difficulty over joined up thinking is that the home education officers and the social workers don't work together as they should. And there's a lack of understanding about the boundaries between the two pieces of legislation. If social workers were allowed to do their jobs properly, as they should do, and educational home educating officers didn't try to do welfare work but passed it over to the social workers, we wouldn't see these cases arising so often.
But Mike, wouldn't you agree that we need every child to be known to the nearest school? Even if they're not attending, there's a simple, not expensive way to check where our children are, so children are not vulnerable to the dreadful neglect that we've seen in some of these cases that are coming through the system.
If you brought in compulsory registration, do you honestly believe that those families who are abusing children would comply with it? All you'd get is the families who are complying with all the legislation would comply with this as well. It's the families who wouldn't comply who are the abusers.
Are they being properly cared for and properly educated?
All right, thank you both.
You won't find them by this.
Thank you very much. Mike Fortunewood, Barry Sheerman, thank you.
Thank you.